Hello, and welcome to Greet the Week. I am Mona Duncan, and I'm here with my co-facilitator, co-host, Jan Moray. And Jan chose our topic for today, and it is the art of negotiating our differences. And we're going to be looking at the connecting and disconnecting habits that was isolated by Dr. Glasser. Not that there's a lot more, but we took 7 of things that kind of tear apart and harm negotiating, and 7 habits that kind of bring negotiating to a successful conclusion. So Jan, I noticed that you put in there that we was going to be looking at ways to, well, you tell us. What's your thoughts for today?
Okay. Well, I was just thinking about our lives are just full of conflict. I mean, little bitty disagreements and huge discussions, and I mean our whole country is pretty much divided from a political standpoint at this point. And so wouldn't it be great if we were able to deal with all of these disagreements and be willing to agree to disagree? And how can we do that? And so I'm thinking of the connecting habits, and the last of which is negotiating our differences. Because a lot of times when we want somebody to do what we want or to agree with what we say, we bribe them, we threaten them, and we start doing all kinds of negative things. But did you also think about when people are negotiating, they're full of emotion? Because when you have your mind set a certain way, you have a certain belief, and a lot of times you believe very strongly in that. And when somebody says that they disagree with it, it brings up such great emotions. I mean, you think about hundreds of years ago in the area of Copernicus, it was heresy to say that the Earth revolved around the sun. and you think about that now, and you go, how can people have had such huge, strong emotions about that? Because right now, obviously, we know that is the way it is. But it's with our ideas too. We have such strong emotions, and so to try to think of, okay, let me go ahead and acknowledge those emotions, but I don't have to act out on them. And when we're negotiating with somebody else or having a little argument or a little disagreement, the emotions are going to come up. And so how can we, sit with that emotion and say, okay, I'm feeling this anger, I'm feeling this anxiety, but let me just put it aside for a minute, and I don't have to act out on it. How is that helping this discussion that we're having? So that's the way I wanted to get started today, is just to talk about how can we train our brain not to go there.
Right.
Our first thing is to jump on our emotions when we feel this emotion, so we have to act out on it.
Well, I was reading the other day, and I came across a couple of quotes from William Powers, who wrote, what was it, Perception, the Control of Behavior, the Control of Perception. And he said, what we commonly think of as control is not control at all, but conflict.
Okay.
Yeah, that's kind of what you're saying.
Right.
Intrapersonal and interpersonal conflict thus result directly from our misunderstanding of the feedback control process in ourselves and in others. Just keep returning to the one basic principles. We control what we perceive, not what actually exists, and not what we do.
Right. Right.
And so we are controlling for what another person's conception is, that
right.
The world is not flat.
Right.
Or the sun is not the center of the universe, or the sun is the center of the universe. We're trying to control their perception of it. And of course, as we have more proof to come in that begins to seems to overcome doubt. Like, some people still to this day do not believe that our astronauts actually went to the moon.
Right, yes.
Because there can be so many things, with holograms and all that can seem so real that isn't.
Yeah. Yeah, there's so many things they can do that to make it look like they're actually on the moon, and what is it that they're out in Arizona or in New Mexico somewhere is where they filmed filmed the moon landing. But you're right, it is our perception, and that's what Dr. Glasser teaches us so much, and he learned that from Bill Powers, or he got that idea in his head from Bill Powers, that about the whole perception thing. And that's one thing when you start getting into choice theory and really understanding it, that you realize how different people's perceptions are. And you begin to question your own perception of things, and where did I get that idea? And sometimes you can even change your perception. I have read something, like somebody will send an email and I'll read it a certain way, and I'll say that person is attacking this or whatever, and then a little later I'll come back to that email and read it again, and I won't get that reaction at all. I won't get those thoughts at all. I'm like, how did I get that from when I read it the first time? So even for ourselves, just depending upon what we're thinking about at the time, what else is going on in our lives, we can change how we read something.
So our perception is not just what we see.
No.
It's what gets in and kind of mixes together for all those things that make us who we are, our very being.
Yeah.
So as we begin to look at something and just question with ourselves, how could I see this differently?
Right. And be able to be open to that, and open to the fact that there are different ways of looking at things. And there always are. I mean, if we just listen to the other person of what they're saying, we really listen to them instead of following through with our emotion, the first reaction that we have when they said something, to really understand. I mean, Stephen Covey says that it's one of his 7 habits, is it's the first to understand, then to be understood, or something like that.
Yeah, and to listen without an automatic rebuttal.
Right.
Yeah, to actually hear what is being said, and to think about it before that little pause, that think about before the response.
Yes.
We can, and even if it is a type of rebuttal, it could be said more graciously as opposed to demandingly and off-puttingly.
Right.
Yeah.
And then another concept of choice theory that I like to bring in for all of these discussions on with conflict and stuff is the whole solving circle thing. Where is this relationship important to me with this other person? And so how can I say this, and how can we discuss this in a way that's not going to damage the relationship, where it's safe for each of us to bring in our own opinions, our own perceptions into that conversation, and not feel like we're going to get chewed out or called stupid or whatever, but I'm able to have my own thoughts and have my own way of thinking, and we can discuss it and talk about it.
Right, because I mean, it was initially talked about negotiating, but then whenever it went with marriage, and for those of that may be watching later that may not be familiar with the solving circle, is that Dr. Glasser would take a imaginary piece of chalk and draw it all the way around the couple, and would talk about the fact that there were 3 entities within inside that circle, and what were they? And of course it was was each mate, but the 3rd entity within that circle was the marriage itself, or the contract itself. Because whether people were together as common law, or whether they were together because of a legal ceremony, there's still a legality to it. Because people that are, getting together and then breaking up, regardless of whether it was a legal binding or not, it's still a legal binding. Because, the police and all kinds of other things will step in if someone's property is not given back to them or whatever. And so he was looking at the fact that looking for the good of the whole. And that, of course, is expanded to parenting and to business and to absolutely everything.
Right.
That is, we can look for the good of the whole, not just this little entity or that little entity, but for everyone, so that we can get along reasonably well.
Yeah. And so it's not compromising. It's not like I have to compromise what I want and you have to compromise what you want in order for us both to be happy. It's like, okay, let's look at our relationship as a whole and what is the best answer for this relationship. What's the best way for us to work together so that the relationship is the one that benefits and grows from this, instead of just trying to come to some kind of an agreement that neither one of us are really happy about. But if you can take the individual parties out of it and look at it as the whole instead of the parts, you may be able to come up with a better decision. And I think that's where you can get to the agreeing to disagree.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, of course, that does not mean that there isn't compromise.
No.
Because there will be, and there needs to be, but it'll be a little bit of give and receive on each side.
Yeah.
Each person needs to make a little bit, and not only is that in an individual relationship, but again in business. Hiring is a two-way street. Not only do you agree to be hired, not only did they agree to hire you, but you agreed to be hired.
Mm-hmm.
And so we may have a more brilliant idea than what is in the book of rules for the business, but to just begin to implement them, there may be a lot of pushback from others because that's not the way we've always done it.
That's right. That's a big pushback in business.
Yeah. And so sometimes we may have to look at the fact that, well, this is the way that we have done it, and it has been somewhat effective, but could it be a little more effective if we implemented some of your idea, maybe not all of it, not hook, line, and sinker, but maybe we could, again, the word negotiate.
Yeah.
So
and the other thing too, when you come to when the argument is over, somebody has this one idea to do something and somebody else has another idea to do something. Because I use this a whole lot when I was a young engineer, and of course all the operators were older than me and had been in the job a lot longer than I was, and they had their own ideas, but they had experience behind them, whereas I had the theory and the schooling behind it. And so I always let them do their idea first, because we weren't going to be able to convince the other person that our idea was any better. And so, okay, you try your thing. And so I let them go. And a lot of times it worked out fine, but sometimes it didn't. And so when it did, they'd come back and they would be a lot more receptive to doing my idea. And so I think that's so big. I mean, if it's something that's not a huge, that won't have huge consequences where nobody's going to get hurt or anything, what is wrong with allowing the other person to do what they want to do, especially like on a parent-child or boss, direct report kind of relationship, because that builds so much. The person becomes more respectful of you and feels better about you and your relationship when you allow them to do what they want instead of constantly telling them no, you're going to do it my way. This is the way it's going to be. And most of the time, their idea. I mean, there's nothing that's going to harm anything. It might delay things a little bit, but you gain so much in the relationship between them because you listen to them and you allow them to do what they want.
To validate. Yeah, that there's some value, and we may put it in, we may not, but there's still some value there. Yeah. And I had the opportunity one time of working with a company that there was a technical person that was nearing retirement, and there was a young person right out of technical school, and their ideas were, I think their ideas were for improvement, but they were going about it in different ways. Mm-hmm. And so I'm thinking, oh, great. I don't know, technology, no, that's Jan's department, not mine. Anyway, so I made out this little thing, and I gave it to both of them. And it was, what is your understanding of your job description? And and I put the boss's name in there, or the company's name in there, and what is XYZ's understanding of your job description? And gave the same thing to each one of them. Okay. And then the third thing was, how do you contribute and how do you fulfill your job description? And so anyway, I gave them those things to think about and to fill out before we got together. I wanted to already be thinking about that before we got together to talk. And so we set up for a dinner with the soon-to-be retiree and the new coming in tech grad and the boss and myself. And we went in and sat down, and as soon as we sat down, the younger guy, and I was so impressed that it was the younger one, spoke up and he says, "It's already been solved."
Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Because in looking at what his job description was and what the company's job description was, and thinking about what the other guy was doing also, I mean, they matched. So we just had a really, really wonderful time of walking at how they can work together. And
make
and
those
it
last few
can.
weeks or months count so they could really learn and pick his brain.
Yeah, and appreciate the wisdom of the one that had been
Yeah,
there for so many years,
right.
and appreciate the new knowledge and the new technology and the new input of the one that was
Enthusiasm.
right, exactly. And seeing that the job description basically is the same thing. And, looking at the politics and wanting better education and wanting food for everyone and wanting legalities. You know what? I think they're both wanting the same thing. It's just both parties, all three parties, all five parties. It's all wanting the same thing, but because we're so focused on it as the way I see it, that we just really can't. Well, we
Right.
can. We're just not to that point.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
when we get to that point, I want to speak it into existence that we are
Yep.
getting there. That we are getting there, that we're not abolishing the law, we're going to fulfill the law that's for the good of the whole.
Right. Well, that's another thing when you're negotiating differences. Sometimes you are focusing so much on the difference of your own solution that you're not really focusing on what is the problem that we're trying to solve. And are we in agreement that the problem we're trying to solve is the same? So let's start there. let's first start with what are we trying to accomplish here? And if we can agree on that, then we might be a little bit more open to listening to what the other person, their idea of where they're coming from and what they're trying to do.
Right. So if we're wanting more light on the subject, to get more light, it might be enlarging the window itself so sunlight can come in there. Or it might be as simple as, actually turning on a light switch. So it's just listening to what the problem is. What is it we're wanting to improve? And focus on that one thing instead of trying to look at so many minutia things, or trying to look at so many. It may be a thing as opposed to a person.
Yes. Yeah.
Maybe something that can be more concrete. That just moving a little bit, just taking I think of all the remodelings and so forth. Well, it'll work as long as we refix. You can take that wall out as long as you go in and rebrace that load-bearing wall so that it doesn't fall down when you take the wall out.
Right. And if you can just step back a little bit from your idea and the other person's idea and say, well, that idea can work, and maybe we can just work together to try to make that idea work. Instead, it doesn't have to be done my way. I think my way is a more reasonable answer or a more robust way to do it, but it's not the only way to do it. And so let me put my ego aside for a minute and say, okay, we don't have to do it my way. Your way can work. I think there might be some issues with it. But let's move forward and let's talk through it.
Right.
Because that first no that you give somebody, where you're not even considering their idea or their opinion, what I want to do is right, what I'm thinking is right, and you're wrong. It's that first no that just really puts you in a bad position. It's difficult to get out of that, but to be more accepting Okay, tell me more. All right, I hear what you're saying. Help me understand a little better. I've got a few concerns, but maybe you thought this out. Give the other person the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What if it would work? What if it could work?
Yeah.
And it's always it's thinking higher and feeling deeper. And a lot of times what happens is we go to the emotions where we feel deeper, and
Right.
it goes into anger
Right.
and that kind of stuff. And then our thinking begins to just shrivel and to shrink
It's
rather than, and as we think higher, other possibilities. And then as we think higher, we can feel deeper, as in have a little respect for the person that has another idea. Just giving them respect. We may still disagree with the idea, but just giving them respect that there was something there in their life that brought up that idea. It wouldn't have been spoken out.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think those emotions are so important to be aware of, because, and I know I've said this 1,000 times on these shows, but the whole thing that just because you feel it doesn't mean you have to act out on it. And if you can just learn that and deal with that, and that, okay, I'm feeling really anxious right now. I'm feeling all this anger coming up right now, but that doesn't mean I have to act out on that anxiety or on that anger. I'm going to try to take a couple breaths here and calm myself down and listen to what the other person has to say. And after you start doing that for a while, it does become second nature, and you don't react so quickly on those emotions.
Right, right. And it's not only the feelings, it's also the thinking.
Right. Yeah.
How can I think of this in a different way? Or how can I think of the person that's giving this,
Yeah.
as we have our higher thoughts that this is a person of worth and value, and they do have a little sense, we can have a more gracious nature toward them to at least hear what they had to say.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, I'm kind of in my fourth. Well, initially I was thinking, how can I quit thinking these thoughts and getting angry and getting frustrated and, that kind of stuff. And so I came up with brick wall, brick wall, brick wall, brick wall. If I just make myself focus on something that's going to distract me. And then, I want to just cancel. When I'm thinking, well, you're just speaking from ego, or you're just whatever. I'm just going to say cancel, because I do not know where another person's coming from.
Right.
Just cancel. And then my third way was to just begin to break into song. Sing a song, make it simple to last your whole life long. Just break into song. And now my fourth one is also breaking into song. But it's a song, I wasn't, taking the Carpenters. I've got my own song now, which is I sing it to myself more than I do out to the public. But it is the fact that circumstances cannot steal my joy.
Right.
And I have joy within, and I want that joy to come without. I choose to respect. I choose to respect. I choose to respect. Even I don't have to go there, but even in difficult circumstances, I choose to respect not only the person, but I choose to respect where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
Because you know what? If you've never been on the arid side of the desert, you don't know what it's like. If you've never been to that place where there's total disregard, you don't know what it is. And so just have respect for the fact that whatever this person has gone through, they're a valid human being that has validity.
Right. Yeah.
And what they're trying to say is worth listening to, at least for a few minutes.
Right. Because
I think,
you don't know what another person has been through, what they have seen, what they have learned. And until you open up and encourage them to talk about it and let you into that world and help give me a little glimpse of what's going on there, you just stay stuck in your life.
Right, right. And then I remember I'm thinking back to one time whenever I was teaching a seminar, and there was one person in there that was vocal and and disruptive. You know, I always wanted to give their inputs, and there was already been several groans from the fact that I'd listened to that person, you know, on occasion.
Yeah.
Anyway, we was down at another time, and this person was just adamant about explaining where he was coming from. And I said, is this absolutely, do you absolutely have to, you know, explain all this? And he said, yes, I do. I said, okay, tell you what, I'll give you exactly 5 minutes. And, you know, there was groans from the other people there. And I said, the rest of you can take a 15-minute break.
Oh.
And they got it. And, you know, I took his audience away. And I went to him and I said, okay, I'm timing. You've got exactly 5 minutes. Go. And I listened to him, and I listened to him, and I listened to him. And then after he had rattled on for about 5 minutes, I spoke, you know, made a few comments, and then I graciously asked him if he could stay for the rest of it, but not be so not make so many comments. And he agreed that he could.
Okay.
Because I said, you know, it may be better for us to continue this because I'm not going to disrupt the rest of the people that paid to be here.
Right.
You know, I'll
right.
meet with you at a later time if there are other things that we need to go through.
Right.
And so what's a negotiation of sorts?
Well, that is, definitely is. But, and people want to be heard. So did anybody stay to listen to his 5 minutes, or was it just you and him?
It was just he and I.
Okay.
Just
okay.
he and I.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. Although there had been others that, you know, had rebuts for him initially from the first 2 or 3 times that he had spoken out.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
so even though he didn't have his audience, he still kept going and told you about what was on his mind.
Right. Well, I mean, you know, at least I guess better to have one person hear you than no one.
Right.
And
But
and
that's
I
so, go ahead.
well, I repeated back to him, "Am I hearing you say?"
Okay.
And he agreed that, yeah, someone's finally hearing me.
Yeah.
And sometimes once we're heard, we can shut up.
Exactly. And there's so many people, especially in the workplace, just want to be heard. You know, they've been told, you know, to be quiet. Excuse me. And they just want to be heard. I mean, I can remember a long time ago, there was a lot of dissatisfaction in the work area, and so I called everyone together and I said, okay, let's air it out. Let's talk it all out. Let's find out what's going on. And I let everybody talk, and then when it was, you know, most people, you know, had their say, I said, okay, now what do you need me to do about it? And somebody spoke up and he said, Jan, you know, just talking about it is good enough. We don't really need you to do anything, but we appreciate that you got us together so we can hash it out.
Exactly.
Sometimes, and like you said, that when you were a consultant to that one group, you know, the old guy and the younger guy, and they worked it out before you even got there. You know, sometimes it's just, let's hear what your expectations are, and I'll give you what my expectations are, and see how far apart we are. But we probably aren't that very far apart. I just need to listen to what you have to say, and once I feel like I've been heard, then it takes my guard down, and I'm more willing to cooperate. And that is just so simple to do. And I think the same with negotiating differences. Let's find out how far apart we really are.
Right. Because we may be more like them than we're willing to admit. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so it's just to start to become aware of that, and aware of how, when somebody says something, what emotions build up inside of you, and understand that it's not what they're saying that's causing you to have those emotions. It's what your preconceived notions are about that person, about the topic, how many other people have been after you for it. And so let's stop. And if it's a lot of people bringing up the same thing, well, maybe there's something to it. Maybe you really ought to listen and see if you can do something about it.
Yeah. And it's realizing, do I want to contribute to the problem, or do I want to contribute to the solution?
Absolutely.
And it's not said, I'm not the answer man. I was talking with a guy last Friday, and he kept asking me, he says, well, what do you think? And I says, well, what I think is, it's what do you think? Because you're the one that's living your life. I'm not the answer man. You know, you've got to come to those determinations by yourself. And so I put out 3 or 4 suggestions. I said, I'll be glad to give you suggestions, but I'm not telling you what I think, because because you are living your life.
Right.
And I don't want you blaming me.
Right, exactly. He's the one who's going to have to suffer the consequences of it, so he needs to make the decision himself. But don't go have me, give you suggestions and you come back around and say, well, Mona told me to do this.
Right, exactly. And the thing of it is, I could tell he was getting frustrated with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I changed the subject, and I said, something about this. I said, well, now, you've had 2 or 3 things here that you want to work on. I said, maybe we need to work on one other area. And, we went back. And anyway, when he got ready to leave, he says, well, this has been the best one yet.
Okay.
And I said, and it will continue to be a lifelong thing because you take responsibility for your own decisions.
Right.
And what you're going to
Some
do.
people don't want to take that responsibility. They just don't want to go there. It's like you have to tell me.
Mm-hmm.
And I can understand that, because I was like that. I remember that. I was like that growing up, because I felt like if I did the wrong thing, I would get in trouble, or somebody would fuss at me or yell at me. And it was hard to start taking responsibility for my actions and my own decisions. But once you do, you feel so much better about yourself.
Yeah. And the thing of it is, when these Greet the Weeks and then other things that we work, just keep on with the principles that really do work, that we are finding in our individual life, in my personal life, that is so rewarding and so powerful, and to speak it gently and so forth. And if someone doesn't agree with me, it does not diminish me.
No, correct. Absolutely.
And at least it's been out there so that you can think about it. You may think I am crazy as crazy can be, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's right.
But check it out and see if you can be crazy too. And when you start doing that crazy suggestion, say, and if there's an aha moment, embrace it.
Right. Yeah, you don't have to come back and say that you were right.
Exactly. I'm not looking for that. Looking for a happier countenance in you, looking for more joy coming forth. That, and the thing of it is, with human nature being as it is, they don't even, the person that really took your sage advice won't remember it was you that gave it to them anyway.
That's right, I know.
Because once we own something, it's ours.
Yeah.
It's ours, and then we can use it and we can share it with others, and we can, but share it, not demand it.
Right. So, all right, well, I think we're out of time. Good discussion. So thanks to everybody for watching on the replay, and thanks to our guest who's here today. We always appreciate having to see her smiling face here. And we'll see you again next week for another edition of Greet the Week.